Hello everyone, welcome to Outside Xbox's Spoiling Point, the not at all regular show where we spoil story-based games for your pleasure and edification. Today we're talking about The Walking Dead Episode 5 and The Walking Dead series as a whole, I guess.
Previously on The Walking Dead. Clementine's gone. Wherever she is, I have to find her.
It's just won the Spike VGA Game of the Year awards, the entire series, so deserved, Mike? What do you think?
Absolutely, well deserved. And I think the finale was brilliant as well. Really, really nice way of sort of tying it all up, and also bringing into the sort of final climactic scene all of the nuances and story choices that you've made.
The scene you're talking about in which the guy from the station wagon, back in episode 3? Mm-hmm. 3, sure. The way he comes in and holds you to account, holds you to account for all the little decisions you've made is really clever, because the game is always going to have to taper to a point, and it does, rather than offering like wildly differing endings. But in that very subtle way, it holds you to account for all the things you've done. And if my save game hadn't messed up, it would have been extremely accurate and extremely moving. As it was still pretty moving, but the save game system decided that I had stolen the stuff from the station wagon, which I certainly did not.
Everything was just out there for the taking. We were starving.
Yeah. Otherwise, perfect, flawless climactic end. And then following that, there was obviously the more emotional epilogue as well.
So the final episode, it starts off. Lee's been bitten by a zombie, and you're given the choice of whether to amputate your arm or not. Mike, did you?
Yeah, I hacked that arm off.
Fuck it. Cut it off.
I didn't really think it was going to save him, but I figured it's better than nothing, isn't it? Yeah. And I got treated to a load of quite impressive, like climbing. Animations.
The way he jumps,
he kind
like
of hops and jumps,
and then grabs the rung with his next arm.
The man who's like losing
mere minutes
blood
after having lost his arm, yeah.
It's also a super gory and horrible arm chopping scene. I assume you chopped the arm as well.
I did. Well, I assumed in the way that most decisions are more about your attitude to the decision than what actually happens. I thought that you would lose your arm either way, and it's just a question of whether you're like, yeah, come on, let's do this, or you pass out and you wake up and Krista's already sawed your arm off. She's pretty keen.
Hun, he's awake! We have to deal with this bite.
I mean, in Walking Dead lore in the comics and stuff, there are examples of people having limbs that have been bitten, cut off, and then surviving, not turning into zombies afterwards. What's his name? The guy with the RV in the comics. Dale, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
He gets bitten on the leg and he cuts his leg off, and he's fine. Yeah. After that, there's a few more examples. So I was thinking, okay, maybe this, but then, like you say, the decisions aren't going to be in the game aren't going to be that groundbreaking, where you can literally change the outcome of the game like that. Basically, Lee was a goner. But I just thought, if it gives me a few more minutes to say goodbye to Clementine or whatever, then it's worth going for.
Yeah.
There are very few occasions where there's any doubt about someone's fate. Either they die sooner or they die later, and often that's up to you. Things like Ben.
Right. So Ben, what happened to Ben in your game?
Oh, I dropped him.
At the end of episode 4 in the clock tower. Okay.
Yeah, I dropped him. He was. I gave him the honourable death he was asking for, because he was a liability, quite frankly, throughout. And I thought, well, he'll only cause someone else to die. Is that not what happens? Does he not? Isn't it Kenny dies?
You pull it. Well, yeah, but then again, like we were saying, Kenny dies anyway. So in your game, you didn't have Ben. When you're leaving the mansion across the rooftops, for me, what happened was Ben is trying to cross over onto the rooftop. The balcony gives way, and Ben falls into the alleyway below, and he injures himself in the alleyway. So Krista and Omid stay on the roof, and Lee and Kenny go down into the alleyway to try and rescue Ben. And Ben has been impaled on a fence post, so he's not going anywhere. And then the horde starts to come down the alleyway, and Kenny says, "Go, Lee, save yourself. I'll take care of this." And he's got a gun with one bullet in, which he uses to put Ben out of his misery, and then he sort of disappears into the zombies. So we're left to assume that Kenny is killed by the zombies. But obviously in your game, that's different. That plays out.
Yeah. So in my version, you end up the balcony does rattle as you jump off it, but obviously there's no Ben to fall down. So we end up on the roof, and there's like a trapdoor, and Lee's holding the radio, and Kenny slaps him on the back and says,
"Let's keep going, you bunch of lollygaggers."
Or whatever. Whatever it is he says, it's really not that important. And the radio goes tumbling into this hole.
Seems pretty contrived.
Yeah, it does feel that way. And then they're arguing about who's going to go down, and Krista just jumps down, but then she realises she can't get back up. So Kenny goes in after her to boost her up.
What are you doing?
Get her, Ken!
Can't just said all that shit and not do something now.
with the radio, and he ends up dying off screen.
Again, off screen like he does in this. So he dies off screen in both scenarios, which maybe leaves the door open for
A return.
a return for Kenny, the mustache.
Maybe.
I don't know how I feel about Kenny. He was a bit of a grumpy git,
yeah,
right?
He was a bit inconsistent, and
Yeah.
for me, like I did an awful lot for Kenny, and still failed to gain his loyalty.
Yeah, me too. I felt
Yeah.
like that.
And then he gets this hero's death at the end.
Go!
The rest of the episode is basically trying to make your way to the hotel where Clementine is being held, and there's some cool moments in there, like when you basically go on a chopping rampage out the front of the hotel.
It's set to music, right? I vaguely remember that, and there's not an awful lot of that, so it felt special and it felt different and it felt definitely final, and that something important was happening. So that was moving.
And then,
I found.
and then you get to the guy who he kind of, as you say, he acts as like the game's conscience almost. He basically runs through every bad decision that you've made.
Do you know what you took from me?
It makes you think about all the bad
How do you
stuff that
explain
you've done.
this? Like,
I
I'm
did
not
do
that
that.
good a person.
Well, the problem is you
Even
can't
if
get
you've
through the
tried.
game at all by
Yes.
being you can't get through the game with a clean sheet. So
Yeah.
it's kind of cool in that you are always going to be confronted with sort of uncomfortable things that you've done. And I liked that because his point is that he should take Clementine because Lee is a liability and he's done all these terrible things. And you sort of start to come around to, in a way, to his point of view, because even though you feel like you've got this attachment to Clementine, he is making a point that you've done some really awful stuff, but then it's revealed that he's a Fruit Loop anyway. So
Yeah.
He's got his dead wife's head in a
You're
bowling
gonna love
bag.
Clementine.
yeah, which I thought was a really nice, like switch when you finally realise that what's in the bag is the still live zombie head of his wife.
Yeah.
He does level at me the accusation. He's like, you let Clementine eat human flesh.
You let that little girl get fed disgusting human meat.
And I did, regardless of the save game messing up. That is something that happened in my game, and I do feel pretty bad about not having picked the right dialogue option that would just get her to stop eating, or not eat.
Yeah.
So yeah, that really hit home because I was like, oh, that's probably my major regret, or one of my major regrets.
You killed that dairy farmer in front of
I
her.
did kill that dairy farmer.
You had a bad time at that farm.
One time I killed the dairy farmer.
time, and then inconsistently let the other one live.
You're a monster. You're a murderer and a thief. And I'm gonna hurt you so bad.
And then obviously you have the fight with him. Did you kill the stranger, or did
I did my
Clementine
best,
do it
but
for
I
you?
think I failed enough of the quick timey bit that it ended up being Clementine doing it. You throttle him with your one remaining
Yeah, I just
arm
really choked him
as
out
hard
with
as I
one hand.
could.
Yeah.
But I think, like you were saying, you're sort of like you're signalling over the guy's shoulder for Clementine to like reach
For one of the many inputs.
the range of weapons. You're like, no, that one.
I went for the
Give
meat
me
cleaver.
that
I was like, that's gonna be really impressive.
Yeah.
And she gets good. Like she sinks it into his shoulder. It's
Yeah.
quite impressive.
So once he's dealt with, you're back outside. Clementine sees her zombie parents, which is. Did you think that was?
I thought that was maybe a little bit contrived. Like, just as it's all coming to a head, we get. To
I mean,
see
that's
the
where
zombie
they
parents.
were. It makes sense for them to be there because they were going there to find the parents. So
How big is Samantha? How
Yeah,
big is
still
Zombies
a
aren't-
little bit contrived.
Zombies aren't going to wander that far.
But there's
Although-
a lot of people.
Actually, thinking about it, they went to the hotel, but then they went to the hospital because that's what they said on the answer phone. Because the dad had been
Oh
bitten.
yeah, so they've gotten back from the
presumably
hospital.
they
Well, maybe
come back
he
from
got bitten. They
Yeah, maybe.
bandaged him up or whatever, and then sent him back to the hotel, and then he turned into a zombie in the hotel.
Possibly, but okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. That's what happened. Then in the garage, you have your final scene with Clementine, which is, I think, was really powerful.
Get up, Lee! The door is right here!
Where you know that you're going to die, you can't move anymore, so it's almost like you have to kind of impart your final survival wisdom.
What's the wisest
Clem.
thing
What-
you have to say?
Let me just think of some wise things.
Yeah.
How did you approach that final scene? What did you tell her to do? Did you tell her to look for Omen and Krista? Did you tell her to not approach people?
To my great regret, my biggest regret in the game is that I forgot. I told Omid and Krista where to go, and I totally wanted Clementine to end up with Omid and Krista, because Omid and Krista are really lovely. They
Yeah.
would be the best sort of surrogate parents to spend the apocalypse with. But I then forgot to tell Clementine to go and find them or where they were going to be. But I did at least tell her to keep her hair short. And that was less because I thought it was useful information, and more because I thought it was like a kind of sweet callback to that really lovely scene in an earlier episode where he cuts her hair. So it's an emotional line. It's packed with meaning rather than practical advice.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same for me. I said, don't be afraid, which, yeah, I was in pieces.
Oh.
Yeah, I got really choked up. Like I was like,
Yeah.
I'll miss you.
Me too.
and I told her everything was going to be okay because I thought a bit of positivity. You know, everything
Exactly what she needs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you would need it to survive the apocalypse. Just a little bit of like positivity.
Yeah.
So,
I feel
and
good
it was
about Clementine. She'll
About
be
her
okay.
chances.
Yeah.
She's going to make it.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, we'll find out in season 2, right?
Yeah, well, so I told her to go and meet Owen and Kristen, and I told them to meet by the train outside of town, and I told that to Clementine. And then, but I think the post-credit scene, I think, is the same for everyone, which is Clementine walking in a field. She sees two figures on the hill. There's some shells on the floor, like there's been a gunfight, and she is kind of in two minds about whether to call out or not, and they end on that. So I assume that was the same for,
Yeah,
for everyone.
sort of a multi-purpose ending. Like those two figures could be anyone. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weirdly, that suggests she didn't meet Omid and Krista because she's out in the fields. It suggests she didn't meet them by the
Well, that's what I
train
told.
station.
I told her to get out into the countryside.
Yeah, I
But,
guess so,
I mean,
yeah.
you can also tell her to go down to the docks, and I think you get the same.
Yeah, I
ending.
did. Yeah, well, that's
Oh,
exactly
right.
what I said.
Well, that would imply that she didn't meet Omid and Krista at the docks if then she's alone in a field.
I mean, it raises the question about what you think will be the focus of the second season, which they have announced they are doing. I mean, it would make sense. The game just
Game
done
of the
really
year,
well.
sold
Game
really
of the year,
well.
highest
Yeah.
Metacritic on Xbox
Yeah.
360.
Well, they're going to do a retail release of the episode, so that'll come first, I assume, and then at some point in the future we'll see that. But you wondering what will happen?
Yeah,
what
I
it'll be
mean,
about.
So do you think Clementine will be the playable character, or do you think that would make sense for a game like this?
They might be happy to sort of lay her character to one side and say that was her story. And to get enough difference, you'd have to like flash forward a number of years, possibly, to give it some difference and it not just be.
Also, you can't really.
child
I mean, like those kind of
apocalypse.
decisions that you make, they
can't
feel more
do
like
it as
adult
a-
decisions
Yeah,
rather than
yeah.
a child going,
Yeah.
you know, calling the shots.
Right.
And equally, I think one of the defining things about the previous season is that you don't care as much about Lee as you do about Clementine. It's about having someone in your care rather than self-preservation. And I think it would be weird to become the person. It might damage how you feel about Clementine to then be making her say stupid things.
Do you not think it would be a good thing, though, to have they've created this character that people care about so much. Maybe they didn't realise when they started the season how people would react to Clementine, and now they've got this character that people connect with.
Yeah.
That now they can take that and make that the full protagonist of a game.
I don't know. It's difficult to know really, and there will be a degree of them wanting people to be able to pick up season 2, even if they haven't played the first season. But I think Clementine will be there. And,
Yeah, I was going to say, how about Walking Dead's always been sort of an ensemble, fiction in its different incarnations, and you could start with a new cast, new story, but then do that kind of crossover thing where maybe in episode 3 of the next season, like Clementine pops up with Omid and Krista, and as a sort of a nod to that storyline, but without actually following it as directly as that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with kind of moving the continuity on a few years to allow for an older adult Clementine is that it's in the same universe as the comics and the TV series, so everything has to conform. I mean, if they do all this stuff that's 10 years in the future, then that is now canon.
That set the canon for the comics
for the
and-
series.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I mean, I don't know where the games fit on the kind of the pecking order of how kind of Kirkman sees his series.
Yeah,
But I mean,
yeah.
you would imagine he'd want to lead with the comics.
Yeah.
Um,
You think they might be a little bit higher up the sort of the pecking order now that they've done so well and that
Yeah.
they're so esteemed. So
So maybe he'll let them do what they want. I don't know. So that was Spoiling Point, The Walking Dead episode 5. If you've got any thoughts of your own, please leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching Outside Xbox.